My name is Lacey Leone McLaughlin, and this is Unfolding Leadership. Sam first came to America in the fall of 2012 to join the long-standing America's Got Talent showrunner Jason Raff, initially only for an 8-month stint. As she now embarks on her 12th season of the show, she has zero intention in moving back to the UK anytime soon. Prior to this short adventure in the US, Sam was a showrunner on Britain's Got Talent, where she first met Simon Cowell. As Simon and his team were about to launch the US version of X Factor, he asked her to jump ship from BBC to join BGT, a decision that changed her life. Sam had originally ended up at the BBC in her late 20s when she answered a newspaper ad for researchers wanted on the prestigious UK show Parkinson's. As a former dancer with barely any TV experience, Sam somehow managed to land that role and stayed at the BBC for 12 years, working on all manner of entertainment programming. What an adventure. I cannot wait to get into it. Welcome, Sam. So Sam, first of all, I'm so excited to have you on the show and for the world to hear a little bit more about your work and how leadership shows up in unscripted television in a very real way. But before we go into any of that, talk to us a little bit about who you are, what you're working on, and what you're doing today.
Oh, hi, Lacey. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this. I'm Sam Donnelly. I am the one of two showrunners on America's Got Talent. It's where I am today. A little clue behind me. I have been here. So when you asked me to write a little bio, I was horrified to see that my 8 months in America turned into nearly 11 years, like that. I came here for season 8 of America's Got Talent, and we are currently heading into season 19 of the show. So I've been here a while, and that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
That's amazing, Sam. And I am guessing that you have some really great stories and learnings from all of those seasons. And it sounds like they've also flown by.
They've flown by. Yeah. I mean, it's like all of these things. It's funny when you look back, isn't it? Because when you start out on stuff, well, I definitely don't have a plan of how it's going to be. But yeah, I look back and this was a good moment to make me look back. And I was thinking, God, all these years on America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent before that. And then, Strictly Come Dancing before that. And you just made me feel very old. So thank you for
that. Well, in addition to making you feel very old, which you're not, but there's a reason why you've stayed so long. So why have you stayed so long in this role, which you originally intended to do as an 8-month stint?
I think with the Got Talent brand, well, there's a couple of things. I just feel like I'm running a circus or co-running a circus, and I love it. Like, I can't get enough of it. But in terms of I never thought I would stay in a role so long. And the ones that have kept me in the long-term roles, I did a really good stint on Strictly Come Dancing too, are the shows that constantly evolve. So you don't know what you're getting. And unlike, say, a singing show or any other type of long-running series, Got Talent is just always different. Like, there's always new things coming through the door. So I think that that's probably the reason why I ended up staying so long.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it sometimes is a circus, right? And that means in a lot of ways that you're the ringmaster, and leadership is hard in general, but I've got to assume how leadership shows up on something like the work that you're creating, producing, and bringing to the world is even harder. So when you reflect on your job and the impact and role of leader, what are you left with? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges of this show specifically are the same that you would expect, but magnified by the just scale of it. This is an enormous show. And if one season of America's Got Talent is really like 3 different types of TV show, there's the kind of pre-taped auditions, there's the casting, there's the reality side of it, and then there's this huge kind of live component. So there's all the regular issues that come with that. And there's the issues of running teams of real people with real lives and challenges and things that happen in their lives. And then there's the other part of it, which is this huge component of talent that we handle. I mean, just to make the scale, we probably audition just shy of 200 acts every season, like on camera. And all of that's people from, people that have never stepped foot on a stage before to professionals. And that is a management and a leadership challenge all of its own, looking up, because you feel responsible for people, right? When you're in a leadership role, there is a level of like taking care of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like throughout throughout the taping of a season, you're wearing 3 different hats depending on where the show is.
Yes.
How do you have to evolve your style to keep your team engaged through these transition points?
It's funny. I don't think that until quite recently, I never used to think about it. I think when the pandemic hit, I really took a moment to think about all of this stuff. Like a lot of things happened. That was such a pinch point for so many people. It was for me personally. And then you start to really have a moment of self-examination, which is really good. In terms of like changing my style, I think really all I try and do is keep the show as the focus, because it's really easy, right? When you're dealing with loads of issues and loads of things happening, that you can kind of get derailed from your main focus. But if what we're all aiming towards is what is right for the show, then I think we have like a direction and a compass that helps keep everything in track and online. Otherwise, you can get dragged into these kind of cul-de-sacs along the way that just can send everybody crazy.
Yeah. So I'm making an assumption, and I'm assuming that this is the case for putting the kind of show you do on television, that there are some days that are hard.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of hard days.
And there's some days that are amazing. We're going to get to
There's a lot of amazing days. The highs are high and the lows are very low.
So starting with those lows, how do you get your team and yourself through them? Because I've got to assume tensions are high, pressure is high, risk is high, stakes are high, which is different than some of the leaders I speak to in those corporate environments where bad days are a little bit more consistent, good days are a little bit more consistent. So how do those bad days show up for you?
The bad days show up when, a really fantastic act that you have booked drops out the day before they're due on stage. And you know that the day that you're looking down the barrel of the next day isn't the strongest day of talent you've ever had. And your judges are going to be a bit grumpy, or they're going to be a bit disappointed, or whatever that might be. Or, something we've had to handle far too often this year, actually, is, the team is very close knit, and in these sorts of environments that tends to happen. You get that real close bond, and then you lose a team member, and it's really sad and it's tragic. So there's like the personal side of the sort of pseudo family feel of a show like this, and then the professional side with the things that you're really excited about and you've worked really hard to get to a stage where you're going to put it on stage, and then for whatever reason it doesn't happen, and that's a giant bummer, and everyone's like fed up.
All right. Flip side of that. Talk to me what it's like on those days that you just knock it out of the park and everybody feels great. What does that sound like, look like, feel like to you all?
It's amazing. So it's amazing because we're really fortunate that we work on a format and a show that changes people's lives in a real way. So you see people, you hold their hand. This is the team more than me, obviously. They hold their hands from the first time they see them to the time that they might get the golden buzzer, to the time that they pick up their cell phone after a live show and they've just got gazillions of messages. And then what tends to happen is that for a really large handful of people that we work with, they become what we call friends of the show, and they really stick with us. So they're people that, we've had long-standing relationships with, and we can call up and say, hey, Piff, the magic dragon, like, I've got this magician who's on the fence. He doesn't know whether he wants to do the show. Can you speak to him or her and persuade them? And they'll do that, or people that will have back as guests multiple times, or acts that go on to headline their own Vegas shows, or acts that we've got one at the moment that's going to be as part of the Super Bowl. And we're so excited. And I think that there's that feeling of pride in having created a platform that can help lift people up, and showcase their talents for them.
So what I say next is going to make you feel very uncomfortable, because I just knew this about you. Yeah. So this all comes back to me as connection and building relationships. And there is no world in which that does not start with you, whether it's with the talent, whether that's with the judges, whether that's with your team. Is that something that you're strategic about and you're thinking it through, or does it just happen naturally? Help the leaders out there that are listening understand how they can do more of it, because the impact of it on the outside is all these things that you're talking about. Friends of the show, for people who have been on the show 15 seasons ago, that's amazing. Calling people that came on as talent family, that's amazing. That's not a transition you see. So how does that happen?
I don't know. I think it's a case of having the right people in the right roles so that you feel like everybody has the same ethos, right? They understand what the ethos of the show is. They understand that there has to be a level of integrity in what you do, because if you're not transparent and you're not honest about things, you get caught, right? You know what I mean? Like when I was coming up I was a producer, baby producer in England. Times were really different, and it was the sort of world where, you know, it was like it was very sort of cutthroat. It's like anything, you got to do anything to get like what you need and get out of people what you need, and it was a little bit more of an exploitative feeling.
Yeah.
And it didn't make you feel good. Like you felt like you didn't feel good at the end of the day. And the culture that we have here that's grown up over many years is one where you do feel good about that. So people don't last long here unless they have that kind of, feeling towards other human beings and understanding. And lots of our producers, I could bore you silly with the amount of emails they personally get from acts thanking them, expressing gratitude. And that's because of the work that they've done, holding their hands, getting their visas, picking up calls at all sorts of times of the day and night. And that role in itself isn't for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, right people in the right roles is a critical challenge for every employer across every industry out there. And I love how, like, you just make it so simple. It's just what needs to happen. But it's really hard work to make it happen. I mean, that's a huge deal. And to have that consistent success is real. When you think about somebody who's come on and they haven't been the right person for the right role or the show in general, how have you managed that? Because it feels like it's pretty counterculture to what you've got there.
It's tough. It's really tough. What we do here, because we run our show quite differently to other reality shows, is we tend to be really careful about who we're bringing in at the grassroots level. So that's really the feeder for the whole show. And when we bring in people at the grassroots level, they tend to rise up through the ranks. And so it's kind of easier when you're bringing people in a more junior role, because it's easier to spot that perhaps they're not the right fit, or they don't have the love for it, because this show is it can and sort of does take over your life in a certain way. And so therefore that isn't for everybody. That really isn't everybody's dream job, but for a lot of people it is their dream job, and I think they sort of identify themselves quite soon. But yeah, it's bringing in the right people at the grassroots level and then supporting them and promoting them through the ranks, and that's how we've always done it.
Yeah. So when you found that person with all that potential, what happens?
We're very happy. We bring them in. They come in generally as PAs, and then the way our show is split up, we sort of, I treat it like a sports team, right? Like not everybody is. I'm going to use a horrible soccer analogy because that's all I know, but like not everyone's like a centre forward, not everyone's so you just got to find the strengths of the individual person and try and put them in that role and support them with other people that pick up the slack in other areas. We have producers who are so creative, so brilliant, so great with people. They cannot do a Google Doc to save their lives, and that's okay. That's okay. We figure out a way that they can be supported with that so that they can do what they're really good at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's being on this side and hearing you speak so casually around things like, in my world, we'd call succession planning.
Oh, right.
And it just happens naturally. It's so interesting when you think about relationship building and communication and connection and succession planning and development, how it's just a common part of your practice and not something that, in most worlds that I work with, HR spends a whole heck of a lot of time on and a whole lot of energy on. And ultimately, sometimes it works pretty well and sometimes it doesn't work as well. And it's just sort of figured into what you're doing day to day.
I mean, Lacey, we don't always get it right. I mean, there's been plenty of like, oh no, that wasn't good, along the way. But we definitely try. In fact, just before we jumped on the Zoom, I had one of the producers in here, and we were talking about a slightly tricky relate, because my world that I operate in is very small. Kind of all magicians tend to know each other. Even globally, it's shockingly small. And we were talking about how there's an act, not to get into the weeds of it's too boring, but like there was an act that had a connection to another act, and there's like this feeling of like IP crossover, and we think we figured it out, and everyone seems happy. But my advice to that producer was like, just call the other party and make sure that they are happy, because it's not worth the bad blood. It really isn't. And the only thing I've learned in all these years and all these shows is a level of transparency and a level of communication saves so many problems at the end of the day.
Yeah. And the other piece to that jumps out to me is picking up your head, taking a beat, and being intentional and thoughtful.
Right.
Because if you just moved through, I would assume in a show like yours, you could miss these little nuances, which ultimately can be problematic, right?
That's where, in my experience, that's where all the problems lie. When you're going at a breakneck pace because you have a lot to do and there's a lot and communication breaks down, or that's always where the problems lie, when there's that kind of like, not a moment to pause. Like I feel like that I feel like I should have that on a post-it note on my computer, just pause, like, because that's where I've had all the things that have ever gone wrong in my career have always been through that sort of like just barreling into something.
Do you have a good story for us around that?
I mean, I have lots, not all that I could share with you, but I have like, not to get into the weeds of it, but where I have not taken a beat and listened to that little intuition and gone, hold on, what's wrong with this? And I've just plowed on regardless. I've always got into trouble. And the biggest one that I can tell you about is when I was running Strictly Come Dancing, and it was years ago, and we had a contestant fallout. And briefly, what that did was it sort of threw off the algorithm of the way that the voting worked. And we had a live on-air voting disaster. And what happened was that we were basically asking people to spend money to vote via the phone lines. That's how long ago it is, for an outcome they couldn't ever change. And what I took away from that, one of the many lessons, was the couple pulled out right before the show. There was a issue with that, and we were so focused on getting the show on, getting it, sorting out the problems, the time that was like left in the show that was left vacant by them, and all that stuff. We didn't just have that beat to think about everything, like the most important thing, like how is the algorithm affected by this? And we just saw it kind of unfold live on air. It was one of the worst experiences of my life in TV.
And I'm guessing you couldn't do anything. You're just watching it happen.
It was in England, where the tabloids are really brutal as well. So it was when the tabloid newspapers were at the height of their fame, and
when they're very kind and rewarding of failure and acknowledgement.
So supportive, and they really wanted to hear the balanced argument. My picture was in the Sun newspaper, which was, a huge circulation, probably the biggest tabloid at the time. And they had put a picture of me, a picture of the head of entertainment at the BBC, and a picture of the head of the BBC One. And we all had a number, like a voting number underneath our picture, for the readers to decide who'd made the biggest mess up, whose fault the mess up was, and to vote us out of our jobs. And it was really, it's funny now.
Okay, first, my first question is, how am I just now hearing about this?
Well, Lacey, I will show you the framed cutting that I have in my house, which I only just had the courage to get framed.
I need to see that. That's amazing.
Pretty good.
Second question, the real question is, you wake up that next morning, you see that, you're dealing with the fallout. What do you do?
God, it was awful. It was really awful. It was, not only was it awful the next morning, it was awful that night, because in those days we taped at BBC Television Centre, and because in the UK you have one time zone, we have the voting, the results show is after the main show. So we had the main show, and then we had the results show. So there was something like half an hour in between. And like, it became obvious in that time what was happening. It was like a runaway train. And it, the news was reporting on it as it was happening. It was just such a big deal. Now it seems funny, but at the time it was such a big deal. And it was like just this terrible feeling of, humiliation, and like you have this like responsibility for this much loved brand. And I can't tell you, it was terrible.
When you reflect on that, when you think about getting yourself and the team through it, is there something that you're most proud of in terms of how you handled it?
I can't say I look back on that one with a lot of pride in terms of like it was the first time in my career I think I had to deal with something really like what I felt like at the time was monumental. And I think that it was just the shock of it was just like terrible. But the lesson I took is that, of course we got through it. And it's all about, to me, and that's the same with a problem, small or large. It's like, how do you handle it? How do you handle yourself? And how do you move forward and try and, keep the ship steady, and I think that that's the big, in terms of leadership, that was a huge moment where I thought I have to be a proper leader now. I'm not just like the senior producer, like, because you just kind of get to be a leader by just getting promotions in your job. Oh, you did that good. Be this. And then at some point you realize actually people are looking to you for leadership. And that's a bit of a shock. Well, it was to me anyway.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the lessons and what you would do differently from that experience have been impactful to what you've done. And I can only imagine you've had opportunity to use them on the show of the size and the magnitude of AGT.
I think the lesson is if something doesn't feel right or you're worried about something, like pause, ask for help and, other opinions, and, just take the moment to pause. It's never a stupid question.
I'm going to pivot for a bit because I think the global stage in which you do your work that you mentioned in that last example is so real that I want to take us back to that a bit more. And there's clearly a lot happening in the world these days, and it is hard to be a boss, and it is hard to go about doing what you're doing and managing a team. And then I'm guessing it's intensified when everybody in the world is watching and you have a loyal fan base that loves your show and lives for your show. And then you have people on your show who the world is watching, meaning your judges and even the creator of the show. How do you manage all of that? It feels like a huge responsibility.
I don't think you can think of it like that because it drives you crazy. It's like thinking of a big project. You think it's like so enormous, it would just be overwhelming. I think you have to think of it in bite-sized chunks. But I think the real thing for me that I try really hard with all of these things is to kind of do your best. I know that sounds really kind of Pollyanna-ish, but it's like you just got to do your best with something and be honest and transparent. And I think that's the way to navigate stuff because it is complicated. It's like keeping a clear focus of what it, like we talked about earlier, it's like, what is the unifying aim of what you're doing? And trying to be aware of what doesn't serve that and what does serve that. And I think that's all I can do is like think about what that is, not at all costs to people or anything like that, but how do we gracefully get to this end point that we're all aiming for?
Got it. So you said there were 3. So you do your best. What were the other 2?
Do your best, be transparent. And I think the other thing that I'm working on so much is to try and instill in the team not to be frightened if things have gone wrong. Because I remember when I was a young producer, I would be I would take it as a sense of weakness if I had made a mistake. I was frightened to go to my boss and be like, so this happened. But actually, that's not, you can't fix something unless you know about it, right? So it's like nobody does anything intentionally bad, things that happen, but it's like you can't try and fix it on your own. That's what we're here for. So I'm trying to instill in them this idea that, if mistakes happen, if things go wrong, it's not their fault necessarily, even if it is their fault.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me because your job is such in a public stage, but the patterns and the themes and the try your best, the transparency, and don't be afraid of risk or failure, that's
Mhm.
so universal across
Mhm.
every team that I've ever worked with every leader that I've ever worked with. Um,
Yeah.
and yet it's what you're dealing with every day as well, and building a team that values those things also, which is kind of cool. What you're saying to me is, hey, a leader is a leader is a leader.
Yeah.
And we all have the same we all face the same challenges, and are trying to get through the work in the best way possible, regardless
Yeah.
of industry.
For sure. And I think that this industry, certainly when, again, looking back on my, when I was coming up in the BBC, there was definitely a different culture. There was a sort of, it's a very kind of like, I don't know, like egotistical kind of macho culture of, backstabbing. And I just, when I think about it now, I just think how ridiculous it is because, what are we doing? We're making entertainment shows.
Yeah, I'm sure some of that still exists. When you see it, what do?
I don't have any of it here. I really try hard not to have that here on this show. I just, and again, that speaks to the culture that you create, right? The people that you have in the show, and if everybody is of a like mind or somewhat of a like mind, you don't tend to have that. But it is tough because people are ambitious and people want to do things, and that is a hard thing to navigate.
Yeah. How many people, and this is not a fair question to ask on the spot, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How many people you think you've trained
Oh God.
have come up under you who are now doing really big, awesome, cool jobs?
Hmm. I couldn't give you a number, but it is shocking to me because I've been here in the US now for over 10 years. Occasionally I still have my friends in the UK that are producers, and occasionally I have calls to ring them up and say, oh, we're shooting this thing in the UK, and who's like good that I can, employ to take care of this. And many times it will be people that like, I first employed, God knows how many years ago as a researcher on some show, and that's really a nice feeling. It's a really nice, you're like, oh wow, that's great that they stayed with it and they're really good. And that the only credit I can take on that is that I was lucky enough to spot them at an early stage. I didn't train them; they were always going to be good. But it's nice to have that connection with people.
Yeah, you make it seem really simple, and I'm guessing if we really went and dug in, that number is pretty big.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a few. I've been around a while.
When people leave you, what's your reaction? When they go on to do something else, something
It's,
elsewhere, something bigger, what happened? What's
it's
your
really
reaction?
it's really funny, isn't it? Because sometimes you're like, it's all about how people do things for me. Because I do like everyone has, I think people should grow and I want them to grow and I want them to go and leave and do other things and then realize they made a terrible mistake and come back to us.
Seems fair.
It seems fair, right? No, but like, people need to move around. And I think you do definitely grow when you do other things and so I'm all for it. The only time I don't like it with people is when they sort of do shady stuff. Like again, it's this thing about transparency. I have a real issue with it. It's like if people go and take a job and then don't tell me and then pretend like they haven't taken the job and try and do shit. I just don't understand that kind of thing. I really think, again, if you can keep this transparency and this communication, there's no problems in life. Like I get it. I completely get why people want to move on.
Yeah, and it's something you want to celebrate because they're going to do something amazing. And instead, it's kind of happened in a way where you're like, I don't even get to be happy for you, or I am, but
Yeah.
not right now.
And it just leaves a bad taste in the mouth when it doesn't need to. I don't, maybe that's just a sort of, I mean, I probably did it too. It's just maybe a sign of like inexperience or something like that. But yeah, definitely if you're upfront about things are much easier in life.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask that same question. So have you ever left in a way that you've regretted?
Yeah,
Tell
I
us
mean,
about it.
I've never ever, I'm very proud of the fact that I've never quit on a contract, no matter how ghastly the show was. And I've done some shows where I would go home every night and cry, I never walked out on a show. So that either means that I've got a high tolerance for abuse and very low self-esteem, or I don't know what it means. But so I am proud of that. But yeah, I mean, definitely when I was younger, I think it comes out of a place of fear, right? You're frightened that you're going to somehow burn a bridge or that that the person's going to be angry with you. And I think if somebody's angry with you for moving on, that's just strange.
Yeah. So for all the people listening who are fascinated by you, the work that you do and are in your space, if they get an opportunity to do something else, how should they handle it? What should they do with that spirit of transparency? Give them some advice.
They should come in. They should not leave when they're leaving people high and dry. That's my number one thing. I think you're a part of a team and you don't leave people stranded. So you don't go mid-show or when you're needed. I think you have your contract, and I think you should, generally speaking, honor that contract, unless something really, there might be something that comes up that's a different kind of circumstance. But generally speaking, I believe that you should honor your contract unless something happens that makes that untenable for you in your personal life or whatever. But I think you just have to come and talk to whoever it is and just explain your situation. This is what I want to do. This opportunity has presented itself. I'm mindful that I would like to pursue it. I've loved my time here, and I'd love to come back, but I want to take this opportunity because I want to grow, and these are the ways that I want to grow. And whilst this is a big show with lots of opportunity, it's also a show that people like to be on. So there isn't the same movement. There's not the same. There's a little bit of people are in positions and they are in them for a really long time. So I get that people need to move around and come and go. At the same time, we're a big show with lots of opportunity. So, there's lots of jobs available.
Yeah, got it. So when you think about your years in the industry, we're not going to put a number to them because that's just cruel for women of our age. But when we think about the experience that you've had, are there things you wish you would have known earlier in your career that it would have saved you some hassle over the years?
Yeah, I think I spent a long time early on being scared of upsetting people, being scared. I think that's also maybe a woman thing, or certainly something I feel is like, I felt like I felt like I just had to do everything, like prove myself over and over again in these ways that, I was sort of scared to speak up about stuff, or I was scared to ask for things. And I think that, again, in the spirit of transparency and communication, I just wish I had been mature enough earlier on to be able to talk to people openly about what I wanted, what I saw happening, or, just kind of where my ambitions lay or my interests lay, rather than just doing whatever I was told to do.
Yeah. So for all of the women out there that maybe feel the same way, how did you get past it?
You just get tired of it, don't you? You just get tired of you just get tired of it. And I think also you get to a point where you have a little more agency. So you get promoted to a position where your values are noted and people see that you have a voice and that you have a perspective and that you are, additive in a way that means that you're not as disposable as perhaps when you were, first starting out and you were a PA moving chairs. So I think that happens. You just grow in your role, you grow in your confidence, you grow in your knowledge, and you feel less like you're on a knife edge the whole time.
Mm-hmm. For the PA on your show or a different show that's fighting through some of that fear, what are the little things that they can do to get some of that agency back?
I think I really look at the PAs, like I really take note of them, and because that's, as I said, that's how that's where we feed our team from. I think that I'm impressed by somebody who's like sociable and polite and can say hello and good morning and all of that kind of stuff, which isn't always easy in a big bustling environment. I'm also and I really notice the hard workers, the hard work. It never goes unnoticed, even if you think, I'm busting my ass and nobody is noticing this, and I was the first one in, the last one out. Trust me, everybody notices. They just don't mention it. Perhaps I should mention it more.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that. So it's about building relationships and getting the job done, delivering, and knowing that people are paying attention to it.
And on the flip side of that, it's not being dramatic. No one's got time for drama.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess, and particularly in your space, not a lot of time for drama that's not happening in front of the camera.
We're all good for drama.
You got it already. Good. That's interesting. So relationships, getting the job done, and staying away from getting sucked into the drama because there's plenty of that already happening.
Oh yeah.
That's great advice. It's great advice. I always get that question from, I'll say from millennials reaching out, or even the folks entering the workforce now, which is, how do I think about getting ahead? How do I think about showing up in a way that's going to set me up for years to come? And one of the things that I'll say is, yes, you get to decide if an organization aligns with your values. And yes, you get to ask for what you want. And yes, you get to establish boundaries in a way that's appropriate. But also being an employee and being a member of the team, there's also an entry level fee of getting in the game, which is getting your job done, right? Doing the work that you've agreed to do in a very real way. And then all of those other things come together. And what I would say is the workplace has changed drastically in the last 10 years. And I'd say even in the last 5 years. And people are allowed to have a voice, but having a voice and doing your job equally as important.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you think about your biggest lesson learned coming up in this industry, just in general, when you sit back and reflect, what is your biggest aha takeaway lesson learned?
Oh God, that's such a tough one, Lacey. What is the biggest lesson? I don't know. I really think the biggest thing is to focus on the work. I really do, because everything else falls away then. All the white noise, all the politics, everything else just fades into the background. And I think that is the thing that I learned, which is I have to be true to what the aims of this job are. What am I trying to do here? And just kind of stay the course on that, because there's so many ways of getting distracted.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm talking about sort of staying the course. When you think about the next 10 years for you in this industry or whatever you decide or choose to do next, what do you want? How do you want to continue to see yourself evolve? What's next for you in terms of your leadership journey?
I think as I mature, as we all do, it's very important to have those moments of self-reflection. It's very important to like sit back and think, oh, maybe I missed the mark then, like we all do. Like it's human, right? We're all human, and sometimes we get things wrong, and sometimes we don't do our best job or our best selves. That's fine. So for me, I think it's about building a team around me who are able to be great leaders and be strong and do my job better than me. Whereas the younger version of me would be like, I was so kind of like wanted it so bad that I think I would have found that threatening. And as I get older, I'm like, no, I really need those people who I look at and think, oh, you could do my job. Whereas in the past, I'd be like, oh God, you could do my job. That's scary.
Yeah, I love it. The idea of building a legacy of people that can do it better than you.
Oh God, yeah. Absolutely, I have to, because it's too you can't nothing can grow in the other way, like, because that means the other route is you just doing all of it, and that's like kind of the egotistical route of this is all about me, and it's really, I mean, this show certainly is not all about any one person. This is like a huge giant behemoth, and we're all just like along for the ride, honestly.
Yeah. And it's not at all sustainable, right? To do it all yourself.
You just couldn't. I mean, it's like that's where things really start to fall down. And it's like, I think the thing I would like the ability to do more is have more time with the team. I think that we're back in the office, and I don't know whether you find this with other leaders, Lacey, but it was very difficult during the post-COVID period when we were all remote, and I never felt so detached from the team as I did then. And it was just impossible to get that creative energy going. And I think that we're much more back to where we used to be. And I love that. I love that ability to like sit with my team and talk with them and put my head out of the door and say, oh, just this idea, or what's happening with that. And that's the best thing ever. That really has been a game changer again.
I'm not at all surprised by that. You talk about relationships and connections in such a real way as being the foundation of the show, how you lead, the success of the team in general. That gets really hard when it's done
Yeah.
in different ways, particularly for creatives. So I'm not at all surprised by that, but it also points out why it's important to you and why it really matters.
Yeah. And I think also, that creative energy comes from everybody having input and kind of everybody knowing what's going on. And that's what keeps everybody, this is a hard job. And what's the motivation to keep going if your job is to cast people and you've had a week where everybody has said no, or you can't find anybody good, or it's just all kind of like everything you pitched has got kind of knocked back. Like, that's tough to do in a vacuum, and it's demoralizing. I imagine it would be absolutely demoralizing.
Yeah. So when you think about creating a legacy of leaders that you leave behind that can do your job better than you, you know this question is coming. Give me what you want to start, stop, and continue to achieve that.
So I want to start having more time with the team. Like, I don't know how you do that. This team is enormous, but just like scheduling, because what also I find happens in my job is there's always a fire to put out, right? There's always something that has to be done. So it's a case of prioritizing. So I need to prioritize that time with the team. I'm not going to give an example over what, because that seems rude, because everything's important, but prioritizing the time with the team where we sit around the table and we talk about, we're doing it later today, where we're sitting around and we're talking about stylistically how are we filming the show. Like, we haven't done that in probably 2-3 years of like, this is the afternoon where we're going to talk about, well, I love this clip. I love the way this is shot. What about this stuff? What about that stuff? And that's how we can keep moving the show forward and stop it from feeling stagnant. It's really easy to have your afternoon taken up by a myriad of other things that come in because you think, oh, I'll just knock that out of the way. But that's like whack-a-mole. It never stops. So I think I want to stop letting other things get in the way of what is important. So getting the priorities right.
Okay. Got the start, got the stop. What do you want to continue? What's working?
That human connection with our acts and with our and with our judges. This is not bullshit. This is the absolute. We are so lucky with our panel and our host that, like, you can have a real, they're not, you don't have to go through millions of assistants they're just accessible, and they love the show, and their chemistry is real. And I think if you didn't have this great ecosystem of people and acts and team, it would so easily tip over into disaster, because we're doing so much at the limit of what's possible all the time that there's no room for like anything to kind of start going wonky. Otherwise the whole house of cards falls.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I was going to say continuing to let people know that you give a damn. Right. And then you said that in your own way. But if you didn't, we were going to have a talk. But it's so clear, whether it's the contestants, whether it's your team, whether it's the panel, whether it's the host, people just know that this team and you give a damn. Yeah. And that's real.
It's real as well, because it's very, a few years ago, I can't even remember what the act was, but something happened and it really clicked in my mind. And it's such an obvious thing to say, but when you're in the white heat of it, you don't think about it. This is the one time these people will ever do this. We do it every year. I've been blessed to do it for, over a decade on Got Talents in the UK and here. And it's a real moment. It's a real aha moment where you see somebody leave the building and maybe they've had a no, or that they're not going to move on to the live shows or whatever, or maybe they are. And you think that's the only time they get this experience. And it really kind of like gave me a minute to think, God, this is really real for people. And it's a human experience. It's not just actors. It's not just, this is important in terms of how we handle people and look after them, because it could affect them good or bad for the rest of their life.
Yeah. And it's amazing too, as a fan, to know that the moments that are captured and that we see are actually real.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes our expectation or our thoughts around that are like, this is television. But to hear you speak and to watch the show and to see those moments and know that they're authentic is pretty special.
I mean, it wasn't always like when these shows started out 15 years ago, it kind of was real. And then it developed into something that was like very, I don't know what it was. It was like this weird period. And now I think it's come back, because I think the audience is very savvy. They're not stupid at all. They can tell what's authentic. They can tell when people are being authentic. They can tell when they're being manipulated. So you can't do that.
Yeah, and I also think the world needs a little good after, the pandemic and all of the things
Yeah.
that we see in the news to be able to sit down and watch something real and authentic that feels good is something
Yeah.
that people need, and that you're contributing to. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely feel proud that our show is, it is even though there are sometimes sad stories in it, it is really feel good. And we're very proud of that. Like that we're a place where everybody is welcome, every story is told, and it's told in a human way. So it can maybe hit home in a way that, archetypes don't.
Yeah, yeah. So, last question for you as we wrap this up. Think about the early career professional that's listening to you speak. What are the final words? What's the last piece of advice you want to leave them with in terms of how to navigate their career journey from start to finish?
I think that what's brilliant about our industry is there's no entry requirement, right? Like, well, certainly not for us. There's no entry. There's no like, yes, you can do, fabulous courses in communication, whatever, there's lots of ways in. But equally, you can just be somebody who is hardworking, has a great personality, and wants to do it. And that backbone and grit is enough to get you in as well. So I do believe that you should just make the best decision of the decisions that are in front of you. I find a lot that people get paralyzed into not making a decision. They're like, you have option A or option B, but in their heads, perhaps they had a different idea of how this was going to pan out. So in my career, I've always done all right by just looking at what's in front of me and making the best decision for me of the options that were there, not hanging back, waiting for a third mystery option to pop up that may or may not ever arrive. So I really think that's something about being active, doing things, making things happen, and just like getting stuck into it is honestly the best thing I can say. Don't overthink it.
Yeah, don't overthink it. That's huge, right? That's what we all get in our own way with that. But
Yeah.
taking action, moving forward, and then reflecting on what you've said throughout, building relationships,
Yeah.
creating connections, doing the work, all really, really amazing advice to leave leaders and employees with, regardless of industry, regardless of role. And I'm sure our listeners are going to find a huge amount of value out of what you've said today. And I can't thank you enough for joining me. This was amazing. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thanks, Lacey.
Thanks, Sam. What I'm left with is, how can you actively be more transparent in handling communication and problems? How do you remember to pause instead of barreling through moments of crisis? And how do you create a legacy of leaders who can do the job better than you? This is Unfolding Leadership. See you next time.